you doing?
Great.
Barry's the one guy I know so far that's been on the Frank Cullotta tour. So I don't know if any of the rest of you guys have or not, but Barry took it.
Very interesting.
Still got a few more people, but yeah, he was. I've noticed people really made some nice comments about it. He must have really been personable to these guys. There's Ken, Mike. Hi Ken, my Facebook guy. Well, I don't know if he can hear. Well, let's see. Waiting room. Well, I need to admit Casey. All right, we got 14. Casey will be 15. There they are. Tomorrow. Anybody else take that tour? I was going to if I ever got back out there.
Yeah, I never got the chance.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Hey, Gary.
Yeah.
When Frank first started doing the tours, instead of private tours, he was going on the bus tour.
Oh, really? I didn't
Robert
know
Allen
that.
had a bus tour he ran.
Yeah.
So we were all out one night, and Frank was, Robert Allen says, Frank, why don't you, instead of getting on the bus when we left the hotel, he said, why don't you meet us over in front of Bertha's? And then we'll have you get on the bus, and surprise everybody.
Yeah.
So a guy gave Frank a ride over to Bertha's to hook up with us.
Yeah.
And we pull up on the bus, and all of a sudden there's Frank in the middle of the road waving his arms. So the bus driver pulls over and opens the door, and Frank comes on. So we're expecting Frank to announce, or Robert Allen to announce, hey, I got a surprise guest. Frank says, pull away quick. I almost got mugged.
Well, that was a little bit like the last time he was out of Bertha's.
Yeah.
He ran from that for just a short period of time. I think he said he ran. Is this, remind me if I'm not right here, Kenny? He ran to where there was people because he's afraid the cops would just start unloading on him because of that history with that Blickstein, or not Blickstein, with that kid that the copper killed out there. That history, he was scared to death of Metro intelligence. Yeah,
he told me that he thought for sure that if he didn't get in where there were some witnesses, the cops and the FBI were going to do him in. He said he didn't think he'd ever make it to the police station.
What I was surprised was when I did it, it was just two of us. Frank drove.
Yeah. And
you wonder, anybody could have taken that tour, and if they wanted to off him, they could have.
Yeah, really. I thought about
because
that.
He didn't know us. He picked us up at the pepper mill and shook our hand, got in the car, and started telling us stories.
I tell you what, talk about putting yourself out there. It's in a dangerous situation. I've given a few tours here in Kansas City to people that I didn't know, and I'm always thinking, I wonder who these people are. It always worked out okay, but I don't figure anybody cares enough about me to kill me. But all right, Casey, we don't have your video. Are you on there, Casey? Well,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have a video. In your lower left-hand corner's got that like a X across.
Yeah, it should be showing it. Let's see. Let me hold on.
Which Casey you talking to, Gary? I'm here.
It's Casey Walsh. Okay, Casey Walsh. I'm sorry, there was two Caseys.
Okay.
Okay, all right, we got you, Casey.
I was confused there for a second. You can't do that to me.
Okay, no, I got a few more here. I got to admit. Let's see, oh yeah. He's coming back. He was on before, and then they couldn't seem to get it going.
Well, Denny, I want to tell you, I've really enjoyed all your books.
Oh, thank you very much. Glad you did.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
Me three.
Thank you. Got a new one coming out by the end of the year. It's called The Informant. And it's about a guy I never heard of before who actually was an informant that helped bring Frank and the Hole in the Wall gang down. And it was really a weird story.
Okay, let's see. I've got
Sounds good.
Steve Rowe, who is muted and there's no video. And Smiley looks like he's hooked up, but there's no video. Brett, there's Brett.
Yep, got it now.
There's our other cartoonist. We got two cartoonists tonight. You can draw pictures of us all, you guys. Although the other cartoonist is gone all of a sudden. I can't remember who's who all of a sudden. What's his name? Too many people sometimes. Anyhow, well, it's about 5, 6 after 8. I always like to start things on time. So let me just kind of kick this off, you guys. You know, I was going to do this again anyhow, and then when Frank died, he was such an icon in this, you know, subculture of mob fans. But he was such an icon. He was so out there, and he was so helpful and gracious to so many people. And I first met him in 2013 at the Mob World Summit, and I met Denny Griffin and Paul Sharp at that time. Paul was on here, but I don't see what happened to him. Paul has an interesting story too, but I got Denny Griffin here, who is a mob author. Denny, when I first started making my first movie, Gangland Wire, I knew it was going to be about the skim in Las Vegas, and I knew everything about Kansas City, but I didn't know much about what happened out in Las Vegas. And Denny had written a book, The Battle for Las Vegas. So I'm noodling around Amazon and find Denny's book. You know, there it is, Battle for Las Vegas. And I get it, I order it, and I get it, and I'm reading down through there, and it's got people, great quotes from the real people who were involved, you know, a casino employee, the FBI agents who were involved, and several other people, and they were, you know, I got hold of Denny, and Denny is the most gracious, helpful guy I've ever ran into. If I could only be that gracious and that helpful. And you know, since then, was that your first book, Denny?
That was my second nonfiction book.
Okay.
The first one was the history of the Las Vegas Metro Police Department.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about
Policing
that.
Las Vegas.
Right, and I never did get that and read it, but I've got the others. And then you hooked up with Frank Cullotta, and you did a couple books with Frank. You hooked up with Andrew DiDonato and did Surviving the Mob, which has been on the podcast. He has a heck of a story. And so you did 3 with Frank. So I guess my question would be, I'll kind of speak for everybody. If anybody's got any questions, just, you know, start talking or raise your hand or whatever, and we'll see that. Most everybody can see each other. But how did you first meet Frank, Denny?
I had finished the manuscript for The Battle for Las Vegas, and the only thing that had me frustrated was I didn't have any mobsters. I had several FBI agents, retired Metro, but I said, geez, I'd love to be able to get some comments or quotes from the Hole in the Wall gang. And I was having trouble locating anybody. They were dead or in prison or witness protection. So I talked to Dennis Arnold, a retired FBI agent, and he had helped me out with the book and introduced me to some of his former associates. And I said, do you have any idea, Dennis, how I can get a hold of Frank Cullotta? He says, as a matter of fact, I do. He says, Frank and I became friends over the years, and we keep in touch. So Dennis hooked me up with a phone call interview with Frank. And Frank just, we talked for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, nothing major. Frank gave me a couple of quotes and answered a couple of questions for me that I was able to get added to the manuscript. And that was how we first met. And that would have been in 2004.
Wow, that's cool. You know, and you hooked me up with Dennis Arnoldi. These guys that go into witness protection program, whoever their agent is that deals with them, they always get real close. I just did one with this Elaine Smith from Chicago that turned Ken Edo, who was Tokyo Joe, the bookmaker, and had the policy up in Chicago, ran policy for the outfit. And she became really close with him. So it's kind of common. I got hold of Dennis myself when I was trying to get somebody, a mobster for my movie, and I couldn't afford him. I offered him some money, so that wouldn't even get me into Las Vegas, which he was pretty fresh. I think he was still in a witness protection at the time and not traveling around under his own name. So I had to forgo that because I was on a budget and I'd already spent all my budget on a cameraman, and I flew out to Las Vegas and had to do all that. So he wasn't in Las Vegas, and it was too expensive. But then as you got to know him, I mean, how did that progress, Denny?
A few months after Battle for Las Vegas came out, I was thinking, this Frank Cullotta would have a hell of a story to tell if he'd be willing to be totally candid.
Yeah.
And I reached out to Arnoldy again, and I said, next time you're talking to Frank, I said, we see if he's ever thought about writing his biography. So a few months went by, I didn't hear anything, and I was talking to Dennis one day, and I did a follow-up. I said, did you ever hear anything back from Frank? I said, about maybe doing a bio. He said, oh, geez. He said, I forgot to tell you, he wants to do it, and he wants to meet with you. So Frank was not living in Vegas at the time, and it was a rather bizarre situation. Dennis says, I'll arrange a meeting. He said, Frank will come into Vegas and meet with you. He said, but because of the witness protection angle, he says, you can't know when and where until it happens. So when Dennis got the meeting set up, and he called me and he said, okay, he said, we're going to meet at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, but I can't tell you where. You'll get that information tomorrow morning. So the next morning he called me and told me what hotel to be at. And I met Dennis, and he took me up to Frank's room, and it was really odd. I had to get kind of patted down, have my briefcase searched. It was kind of a different situation. But Frank and I ended up talking for probably 2 hours or a little more about doing his bio and how we could do it. And we ended up making the deal on a handshake. So I was driving home that day. I got thinking, and I hear this Frank's a career criminal.
Really?
And I made a deal with him on a handshake. Was that a wise move? I started having some second thoughts, but it worked out okay.
When did Frank come out of witness protection?
He actually got out, I believe he was out well before the Casino movie. So it probably 87 maybe, I'm thinking. He voluntarily left the program. He said it was driving him nuts. So he wanted to bail out. Although I guess they're never truly out in the sense they always have somebody they can call or contact, if things go sour. But he was released from the program at his request.
How long was he in the program?
Well, he did a couple of years prison time, and then a couple of years, probably 3 or 4 years total. He was not actively in it that long.
Interesting. Was he in that snitch prison out in San Diego where they sent a lot of those guys?
Yes.
Okay.
And he hated every minute of it. He said it was solid rats. There was the rat center. And he said every time you were on the phone, there'd be somebody sneaking around trying to listen to one of the inmates trying to listen to your phone call. And if they got any good information, they'd run and try to get a deal, for themselves and try to turn in. So he said it was really a cesspool there. He said he was happier than hell when he got out of there.
Interesting. I never thought
So
about
now,
that.
When he first came out of witness protection, was this after the family secrets in Chicago? Was there a Chicago mob still looking for him when he first came out?
Frank told me, because I asked him what it was like, and I said, he said at the time he was still concerned about his safety from the mob. By the time I met him, he said, as far as he was concerned, virtually everybody he had ever dealt with in the outfit or associated with the outfit was either dead or in jail.
Okay.
So he said he wasn't that concerned about them. He said his main concern at that point, when I started working with him, was the somebody might be like the old Western gunslingers, want to get a notch in their belt by knocking off the fastest gun in the West. So he was more concerned that somebody would want to make a name for themselves by being the guy that knocked off Frank Cullotta, somebody he never met, didn't know, but somebody just looking for a reputation. So that was his main fear then.
Interesting.
Similar to Whitey Bulger.
Yeah, that would be your big fear, would be like Whitey Bulger. Are there any Zoom experts in here? I got Paul Sharp from Texas, who is a guy, a little background on Paul. He can't get in. He's the guy who Frank Cullotta had this Larry Newman, another member of the Hole in the Wall gang, tell him about how he flew back to Chicago and killed this guy, and then flew right back to Las Vegas. And he shouldn't have done it. He wasn't supposed to. Frank told him not to. He was kind of his boss in the Hole in the Wall gang. And Paul Sharp's, that was his father. And he didn't find out about it, even though Frank told everybody, told federal law enforcement, who then took it to the McHenry County law enforcement. Nobody ever told Paul that his dad was killed by Larry Newman. Somebody had already ratted him out, and Newman had another murder case back in Chicago area at the time. And the McHenry County people did not want to go after this because they were corrupt, and they wanted to denigrate Frank Cullotta as a witness, try to make it not act on anything that might be good information, which is a pretty common thing with these mob guys. That when they get a storyteller, they try to denigrate them as much as they can and show what a liar they are before they testify. But Paul just, he was here and he's battling this out and said, do I have a telephone number? Anybody know anything about this? How do you find, is there a telephone number for this? I've seen that somewhere.
It should be in the invite, Gary. In the invite,
okay.
there should be a number.
Well, that's not a number there, huh? Let's see, copy invitation, and then maybe if I print that. You guys go ahead and ask Denny some more questions there while I kind of mess around with this.
Can I just say, Gary, that speaking about Paul, one day I got, after Frank's book, Culotta, the biography came out, I got a call from my publisher, and the publisher says, there's a guy trying to get a hold of you. His name is Paul Sharp, and he said that he just read about his father's murder in the Culotta book.
Huh.
So he wanted to touch base with me. So Paul and I ended up communicating, and he says, after all these years, he said, my former babysitter read the Culotta book and saw about Larry Newman murdering my dad and the barmaid. So that was how Paul found out.
Yeah.
That Newman was the guy.
That was a great story. It's also a good podcast, Gary. That's a good one.
Yeah, it
I
was.
interviewed Paul. Yeah. He has a book, McHenry, what is it? McHenry County Murder 1981. I was going to look that up.
Murder in McHenry.
Yeah, here it is. Murder in McHenry. Yeah. A Son's Pursuit of Justice. It's a pretty good book too, actually. It's really interesting. Kind of a different view of a mob murder. So go ahead.
Denny, Frank, you had witness protection program. I understand the initials were JC. Do you know what that stands for?
I do, and a TV channel out of Chicago called me the other day. They were going to do an obit on Frank. And the guy asked me, but I was told that there's an estate issue involved, and that they asked me not to divulge that name for the time being because it could screw up the estate matters. So
Really?
that JC are the correct initials. It's just I can't really say right at this point what the name stood for or what the initials stood for.
I wonder if that would be interesting. He had a life under another name and another Social Security number, as well as Frank Cullotta and that Social Security number. How do you figure all that out, man? Especially, did he have any kids maybe while he was in that other name? So somebody's got another claim to an estate of that guy, but yet that's the same guy. I don't know, man.
What Frank used to do, he'd be coming into Vegas every so often from he was living in Southern California, and he had a pretty good lead foot on him, and he was always speeding. So what he would do when he got arrested or got ticketed for speeding, he'd use both names. In other words, the first time he'd use one name, and then he'd use the JC name, and the next time he'd go back with Frank Cullotta, and what he would do, you could get your points removed apparently if you took an online course of some kind. So Frank would pay women to pose as him and go on do it to get his points taken off. But then sometimes he'd say, I screwed up. He says, my last ticket was under JC and I gave him JC again. He says, so I got in a little hot water, but he tried to flip him back and forth.
That's interesting. There's always a scam in there. There's always a way to work around, as we call those in the computer business. Work around the system. You know, another book that Denny wrote is this one with interview with Andrew DiDonato, Surviving the Mob. What was he like? How'd you first get connected with him?
Well, Andrew, actually his girlfriend at the time read Frank's book. So she told Andrew, she says, why don't you contact this guy? You know, if he did a good job for Culotta, he said, you know, maybe he's trustworthy. Maybe you could do something with him. So she reached out to me and just said that she had a friend who was was a former Gambino associate and was interested in the book, and would I talk with him? So I said, sure, I'll talk to anybody. So we ended up meeting at a restaurant in Vegas, and my wife and I, because it was a coffee shop that we liked anyway, so we were in there, and Andrew came in, and we talked, and then Andrew had a close friend of his. He called him an uncle, who was an associate with a New York family, had been, and he came in. Andrew introduced us, and we were shooting the breeze. And my wife wanted to go next door. There was a store, beauty parlor or something. She wanted to get some kind of cosmetics, and she said, well, if you'll excuse me, she said, I'm going to run next door and get something. And the uncle says, I don't think so. He said, you heard too much. You're not going anywhere. The look at her face was priceless. I'll tell you.
What's the name of that book?
Surviving the Mob.
That's a good read, by the way. You did a nice job on that, Denny.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
For me, it was just a page turner.
I thought so too.
I think I had that read in less than a week.
Really? Yeah, it was a fun book to write. You know, because you had a lot of good stories. And when
that guy's a storyteller.
Oh yes, he's great. He's a showman.
When I first met Denny and Paul, and I just got a message from Paul. We can't figure it out. He can't figure out how to go through the internet, and I can't figure out how to get a phone number or to call in. So we'll tell a little more about Paul's story. But when I first met Denny and Paul at the Mob World Summit 2013, and Andrew was one of the presenters out there, and I had to follow this dude, and this guy, he had that one story about when they stole the car and he stripped it down, and they were gonna take it out of the chop shop that they were using, which was some kind of Brooklyn, just like a storefront, open the garage door, and they were gonna push it out. Well, I guess it still had the motor and it had the steering wheel, which you put a pair of vice grips on, because one of the guys wanted the steering wheel. It was some kind of a fancy steering wheel. So I put a pair of vice grips on the nut that holds the steering wheel on, and in order to steer it, and it would run. And so he started down the street, and a couple of district guys, or one, I don't know, a uniformed marked car came up behind him and then started trying to stop him. And there he is in a car chase through the streets of Brooklyn in this car that has no doors or fenders or stuff on, and he's steering it with a pair of vice grips. Oh man, I had to follow that guy. Jeez.
Oh God, that was hilarious. The shell chase, the great shell
Yeah.
chase.
He tells it. I've got an interview with him on the podcast. I don't know, a couple, 3 years ago. I've done so many now that, but it's out there and it's a good one. I recommend you go back and listen to that. He's got stuff like all the time when, we're on the run, we got $400,000 in armed car heist, and I was hiding out. My girlfriend was this, and I was that. Plus, he's got a great accent too.
We were doing an event at the Las Vegas Clark County Library. They used to have Mob Month every January, and I helped them out. I set up some panels and so forth, and I got two good stories about that. One was Andrew was a panelist the one night, and he had a bodyguard. It was actually a friend of his. He used to be a football player, played professionally with the Jets. But he didn't pack. He was strictly a martial arts type guy, and I was Andrew. We took a little break in the session so people could use the restroom and so on. And Andrew says, he said, I got to get out of here. He says, are you armed? And I said, yeah. He said, well, can you walk me out to the car? And I said, what's the deal? He said, I'll tell you later. He said, just I need to get out of here. So I escorted him and his friend out to the car, and they took off, and I went back in. I had no clue what the issue was, what was going on. And so later that night, I called Andrew, and I says, is everything okay? He said, yeah. He said, what happened was, he says, a guy from New York, a made man from New York, he says, came in the library. He said, I saw him come in the door. He says, the requirement was, if you're a made man and you run into a guy there's a contract on, you're obligated to carry it out. He said, so he says, I figured they was there looking for me, So I says, well, everything's okay now? He said, yeah. He says, everything's okay. So the next morning, we agreed to meet for coffee. Now, Vegas, it wasn't the biggest city in the world, but it was spread out in a pretty big place. So we go to this coffee shop. I meet Andrew there, and all of a sudden he says, Jesus Christ. I said, what's the matter? He says, there's that guy. It's bumping into him in a coffee shop. So Andrew started after him. And he told me later, he says, one thing I learned, he says, you can't run from these guys. If you're face to face with him, you got to go after him. You can't try to run away. So this guy sees Andrew and he gets scared. He drops his coffee on the ground, and out he goes. And Andrew chases him out in the parking lot. And come to find out, the guy had accidentally gone into the library. He didn't know Andrew was going to be there. It wasn't an intentional deal. And he was on parole in New York State, and he wasn't supposed to be out of state. So he was a parole violator. So Andrew dropped a dime on him, and they ended up arresting him, and he took him back, took him back to New York. The other one was one of those events. Henry Hill was there, and I was always nervous with Henry because at the time I don't think he was doing drugs anymore, but he liked his booze.
Yeah,
and I always figured he could probably blow triple the limit and still act normal because he had that capacity, But I'd always be worried whether he was going to show up, and if he showed up for these events, what kind of shape he'd be in. And when Henry drew a hell of a crowd, all you had to do was say Henry Hill would be there, and the place was packed. So there was, I don't know, I think the main theater there held 350 people, and they put in an overflow of another 150 people with a closed circuit TV setup. So we had an audience probably around 500. And Henry shows up 10 minutes before we're supposed to start. And I breathed a sigh of relief, when he came in. But I could tell that he had probably had a tough afternoon. So everybody's got at their place at the tables, and they all got a mic in front of them. And I'm looking at Henry, and I see, as I'm talking to this one or that one or asking questions, I see Henry's head slowly start going down. Then he'd catch himself and straighten back up. And then his head would slowly go down. And I'm thinking I couldn't ignore everybody else and just have Henry talk to keep him awake. I had to keep involving other people. And finally, he didn't catch himself, and his forehead hit the microphone, and it sounded like a gunshot. And all these people are screaming. People are diving under their chairs. Of course, Henry snaps out of it then, and he straightens up, and he realizes what is going on. So he sprang into action. He says, "Okay, everybody, there's no problem here, no problem. Nobody's been shot, and everybody's okay." So people get up, and people start laughing, and giggling a little, laughing more in relief than anything else. But so Henry started talking and, apologized for any inconvenience. And then there's almost the same thing has happened to us with Andrew DiDonato's uncle. This woman gets up and she's going to make her way to the ladies' room. So she's walking across the top tier to the doors, and Henry spots her and he says, "You, where do you think you're going?" And now she's totally confused and scared. She can barely talk. Well, I'm going to the ladies' room. He says, "Oh, no, you're not. You know too much. You're not leaving. You're going nowhere." And she didn't know what to do. I thought she was going to cry. Then everybody broke out laughing, and that broke the ice. But it was quite an interesting time with these guys.
Really. You've been through it, let's go back to Frank Cullotta a little bit. I've got a couple of questions. Anybody got any questions for Denny? Any other questions? I've got one about Frank. I tried to line you up with Ernie DeVino. And by the way, Ernie DeVino was one of the early original members of the Hole in the Wall gang, and he died recently at the same time as Frank. Now, those two guys did not like each other, right, did he?
Exactly.
I tried to, Ernie has a story. I don't know if he's written it or what. Who knows what happened to it now. If there's I think he had a manuscript. He got hooked up with some guy that was really just, I don't know, jerking him around and probably trying to rip him off for the story. I couldn't figure it out. And then I got introduced to Ernie and started talking to him. And much to my dismay, I never got around to doing a podcast with him. I talked to him several times on the phone. He's a good guy. I liked him. And he was trying to peddle his story, and I tried to hook him up with Denny, but then he and Frank just did not like each other at all. So Denny was caught in the middle, as my understanding, right, Denny?
Yeah, I talked to Ernie by phone a couple of times, and basically what he was, his story differed a lot from Frank's, and he was taking a lot of jabs at Frank. Frank and I were friends, and I told Ernie, I said, "If this is going to be an attack book on Frank, I said, I'm going to have to pass." I said, I'm not going there. So we talked one more time, I believe, after that, and we agreed that we were not going to be able to do any business. So I never did any more with it than that.
Yeah. Well, that's, I never did get to see it or anything. I probably should have pushed him and said, "Well, let me take a look at that." At least I'd have had a copy of it. Been kind of interesting. An interesting read, I would imagine. Anyhow, another story about Frank, they had the Bluestein kid, I can't remember, was it Gene Smith and that other Las Vegas Metro Gruber shot, one of them shot and killed
Frankie Bluestein.
I get these names all mixed up. And then supposedly there was a hit out, and that's when Kent Clifford goes back to back to Chicago and threatens all the mob guys. I think he went down to Dorfman's office or to another lawyer's office. I actually, Kent's in my movie, and I interviewed him, and I've got that whole story I put out. I think I got it on my YouTube channel. But what did Frank, did Frank talk about that very much, kind of any more off the cuff or anything? That was such a crazy story.
Yeah, it was Frank felt that Bluestein that night was kind of asking for trouble. He told him, he said, "You got to get rid of those Chicago plates." He said, "The cops, they were out in front of the upper crust." And he said, "The cops and the feds," he says, "are here all the time." He said, "There's always at least one or two cars out in the parking lot watching us." He said, "We think they got lip readers and the whole thing." He said, "They see a Chicago plate come in here." He says, they're going to be interested in you right off the bat." And then Bluestein told him that he had a gun in the car. And Frank said, Jesus Christ, he says, cops out here. He said, they're wild men, you know. He said, they're not much different than us, except they got badges. He said, you got to get rid of that piece. He said, you're looking for trouble. And Bluestein said, oh, yeah, I'm going to take care of it. So he pulled out that night, and sure enough, Smith and Groover were one of the surveillance cars in the parking lot. And just as Frank had predicted, they saw the Illinois plates. They didn't know who the guy was or what his involvement was. They decided they'd tail him, and that was how the whole thing started. And Frank and Tony Spilotro was there that night too. They were Frank and Tony were both talking to Bluestein, and he said it wasn't long. He got the phone call, and it was for Tony. Tony went and took the call, and he came back out, and he said, "Son of a bitch," he says, "they just killed Frankie Blue." So the Smith and Groover followed him, tried to stop him, and that was the whole deal in the Casino movie. There, they portrayed it. He was carrying a sub sandwich or something, or a hero sandwich, but he actually had the gun, and they ended up tracing the gun back to his brother,
Right.
Bluestein's brother in Illinois. So,
Back in Illinois,
yeah.
That's one of the stops on Frank's tour was
Was
the
it?
site where Frank Bluestein was killed.
Did
What kind of site? What area was it? With you know,
Residential area.
Yeah, see, I followed people like that trying to figure out who they were, and usually you call a uniform district car over and get them over and pull them over some red lights, and I don't know, they might do things different out there. Maybe they tried to get in front of him, or they pinned him in somehow. It sounds like, or they might have just got up right on his butt until he just pulled over to stop and see who these guys were behind him. Because I believed, and you might have been in your book, Denny, that he meant some mention to Frank and them that he thought somebody was trying to rob him or something like that.
Yeah, he thought he'd been tailed. He thought somebody was following him, and he
rob him.
assumed it was a thief, a robber, looking to set him up, you know.
Yeah, it was a hell of a story, and Kent Clifford's story is even more of a hell of a story.
I love that story. It's so good.
I read that in the paper back then. I worked in intelligence unit, and I read this. This Las Vegas Metro Intelligence had been kicked out of LEIU, which is Law Enforcement Intelligence Units, which our unit was a member of, and a lot of them throughout the United States. Chicago's not in it, by the way, or they didn't used to be. Because anybody that has any smell of any problems, they don't allow them to be a member of the National Organization of Intelligence Units. And Las Vegas had been kicked out, but they'd been brought back in. And that was after they got rid of that Joe Blasco, who was in the intelligence unit, I believe. Tell us a little bit about Joe Blasco. Denny, if you could, what do you remember about him?
Yeah, Blasco had quite a history with Las Vegas PD, and then after they formed Metro, and somebody he had arrested one time ended up dying, and there was some issues about that. And Blasco started feeding information to Tony Spilotro and other mobsters. There were several, of course, families represented in Las Vegas, and he was giving information out about who was under surveillance and what types of cars they were driving and all that kind of thing. So Tony utilized him, and he also liked Blasco because Blasco had, knew the police calls and the police codes and all this kind of stuff. So he was a valuable man, Tony thought. Frank wasn't that fond of it because Frank's idea was once a cop, always a cop, and he didn't necessarily trust these guys. But so Blasco, and after Blasco finally got fired, then he just kind of started working openly for Tony and the boys. And he was there the night of the birthday thing. He was manning the van when they had police scanners and police radios in it, and he was their communications guy. He was going to monitor all the police activity that night and let anybody know if they had needed to abort the birther's job. Obviously, it didn't work out, but that was the plan.
He was what we used to call a jiggering for him. I don't know if you guys ever heard that term, but if you're jiggering for somebody, it means you're watching out for if the cops show up.
That's what he was doing.
Plus he was monitoring their frequencies too. I would imagine they probably had some idea. They knew that he was monitoring their frequencies. I know we working with the FBI, and this was before radios went digital. So you couldn't really, it was hard to hide your frequency from somebody with a Bearcat scanner. And this guy would know enough to do that and just set it within certain parameters. And then if they got a real strong signal, any kind of signal real close to them that didn't make sense within a certain parameters, they would be hip to, there may be some police activity here. We came up with a real extensive set of codes there for a while when we were on the Sabella and Tuffy DeLuna and everybody during the skim investigation, because we knew they had people out trying to monitor us.
Yeah, they suspected that was going to be the case, and so they had some kind of a secret frequency installed that nobody knew.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that night they could do their thing, and nobody at Metro, other than the people actually involved in the operation or the FBI, knew what this secret frequency was. So that's how they get around it.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, I want to tell you too before I forget. Frank and I got involved in one final book that, and I never would have thought I'd be involved in something like that, but Frank talked me into it. We co-authored a cookbook.
I didn't know about that. I don't see that in your page here.
It's at the publishers now, and it's not out yet.
Right.
But in fact, they're supposed to start editing it next week. And what the title of the book is Frank Cullotta's Greatest Kitchen Hits. So that's the title of the book, Frank Cullotta's Greatest Kitchen Hits. And it should be out by the end of the year. When Frank's health was deteriorating, because I'm a consumer, I'm not a cook. I'm on the other end of the chain. But Frank wanted me to help him organize it and get it typed up, and my wife participated as well. And I said, Frank, the book, is not going to be out for a while yet. I said, what do you want to do here if things don't work out? And he says, I don't care what you do. He said, I'd love to cook and I want that book out. So I promised him that it would get out. So I talked to the publisher and I said, even though, Frank isn't going to be able to see it through, I said, we want to continue with it. So in fact, I got an email from the publisher today. They said, we're moving on it and we're going to have it out for you. So anyway, I'll let people know when Frank Cullotta's Greatest Kitchen hits the bookshelves.
Interesting. Thanks for
So are there some upper crust recipes in there?
Absolutely. The upper crust pizza. That's the lead. That's the lead recipe. And he gives little anecdotes, periodically through it about, different things. And he says, some of these recipes, if you happen to gain a couple of pounds, don't worry about it. I said, forget about it.
I noticed that one YouTube show he did on making a pizza was immensely popular. So, I'll be darned. Any other questions here for Denny?
Do we know? Hey, yeah, sorry, Gary. Do we know, Denny or anybody else, what happened to the rest of the Hole in the Wall gang? Is Matecki the only one who's still around?
No, Leo, I spoke with Leo Guardino about a year ago. I was able to locate him. And at the time, he was driving truck. He was retired. And I told him we had a possibility going of a documentary. There was a network interested in maybe a documentary series based on that whole episode, the whole Vegas Spilatro era. And they were looking for additional people, to have on the show. And I asked Leo, and he said, I'm done with that, and I don't want any part of it, and don't bother me again. So that was kind of the end of that. But that was as of about a year ago. He was alive and still working. And then Frank emailed me within the past month and told me that somebody, I don't know if he did it, but somebody did some kind of a Google aerial search or something, satellite thing, and he said he found Matecki's house. And he said He said, I can almost visualize him standing on the front porch. He said, but I can't quite know if it's him or not. But he said it was definitely Meteki's house, and Meteki was alive. So as far as I know, Guardino and Meteki are both still alive.
Is Gardino up in Chicago? Is that where he is?
A suburb, yeah.
Yeah.
I tried to find that Sal Romano, where he might be alive. The last I heard of him, he was the informant in the deal. He was the, shall we call him, the fly in the ointment that night at Bertha's. But he would testify in the family secrets trial, and he was in a wheelchair at that point in time. I found it in the newspaper article. And so he had a couple of agents. Many times, like with Dennis Arnoldi, you find the agent, or there's Elaine Smith with Kid Edo, you find that agent, and then he can get a message to him many times. One of the people that turned him around, and both the two agents that I found connected with his name as if they had worked the case on him, Romano, when they turned him, they were both dead. So I just found at the end of that, I would imagine Sal, if he was that old and that decrepit during the family secrets trials, whenever that was, in early 90s, he's probably gone. He's probably dead.
Yeah, I tried to locate him several years ago too, and I ran into about the same thing you did. It was
plus he was in the witness protection program, so you got to go through an agent that maintains some contact with him. Otherwise, you're never going to find him.
You know, a lot of people ask me to say, Frank, you know, murders wise and so forth. There always the old stuff about, well, we only kill each other and it's strictly business and all that. Yeah. They said, but how about all the victims of the burglaries and the, you know, what about them? They were civilians. They were not. And it's in the books too, but in the Culotta book. But Frank says, don't kid yourself, because they were using insurance agents as tipsters. You know, the insurance agents would tell them, you know, so and so just insured a bracelet, and of course the insured had to tell them what they were doing for security and if it was in a safe or where it will be located and all that kind of stuff in the value. He says, and we'd go, he says, and burglarize that property. He says, and then he says the same agent who gave us the information would end up getting the claim. These people would file the claim with that same insurance company, insurance broker. And he says, they put in for an awful lot of stuff. He said, we never got. He said, he said, these guys made out pretty good on those deals. We all made out.
Hey, Denny, I took a few of those burglary reports.
Did
oh yeah, I had a $15,000 gold watch. I had a $12,500 necklace. My wife had these 4 diamond earrings, each valued at $2,500 each. And you're going, oh yeah, sure. You know, you live about like I do, dude, and you've got $50,000 in jewelry. I mean, I've taken those reports. I know what that scam is.
You know, just thinking about that, and one of the when I first was doing the Battle for Las Vegas, I wanted to interview Nancy Spilatro, so I was able to locate her and her phone number for her. So I called, and she was she admitted who she was. She didn't try to deny it or anything, but I asked her if she'd be up for an interview. I told her I was writing a book, and she said, well, I got to talk to my son. So actually Vincent was the adopted son, Tony and Nancy's adopted son. So Vincent called me, wasn't particularly happy, wanted to know what I was, and I don't know how much of it was an act, you know, trying to play tough guy, and how much was legit, but he came across, you know, what are you doing bothering my mother? Who do you think you are? Blah, blah, blah. So I told him what I was doing, and of course he wanted to know if there was any money involved. And I said, no, I'm not paying. I don't pay for interviews. So, well, he finally agreed, figured there might be some publicity at least. So he said, okay, I'm going to tell my mother that it's okay to talk with you. And then, of course, he turned out to be part of the deal as well, because he wouldn't let her talk to me alone. But we talked quite a bit, and Vincent was always looking at the money angle. And in fact, where I would pick them up, they didn't have transportation. I'd pick them up to where we were going to go to talk. And it always cost me a few packs of cigarettes or a couple of 12 packs or something on the way to or from, And one time, Vincent tried to sell me a necktie. He says, "I got one of my dad's neckties here." He says, "I'll let you have it for $50." And I
need
said,
a letter.
"Yeah, right." A letter of authenticity, right? So I didn't go for it anyway. But what happened was that later on, I don't know if you remember you Las Vegans about Ned Day, the reporter there. It was always having issues with Tony. They were arch enemies. And Ned Day's car got bombed. The car bomb was planted, and he didn't get hurt or anything, but they found a bomb in his car. And I asked Vincent one day, I said, "Vincent, now," I said, "tell me the truth." I said, "What do you know about that car bomb in Ned Day's car?" And he said, "Well," he says, "I'm going to be honest with you." So I'm thinking that's usually a bad sign when they tell you that. But
normally you wouldn't be, huh?
You would be. He said that he and another guy, he said they just wanted to send Ned a message. They didn't really want to kill him, but they wanted to send a message to him and a friend of his, and he gave me the other guy's name who's still alive. But that they went over and put the bomb in the car and felt that their message got delivered and so forth. So I said, well, maybe I solved the Ned Day car bomb issue.
Larry, what about that? Do you think they solved the Ned Day car bomb? We did a whole show on Ned Day. You and I did.
It sounds like Vincent might have wanted some money for that story. I guess Vincent claimed the credit for the Lefty Rosenthal bomb too.
Yeah. Busy man.
The very busy bomber.
I think Nick Savella claims the credit for the Lefty Rosenthal bomb.
Well, Frank, Gary, you interviewed Frank, and Frank also thought it was Kansas City, right?
He does. I just saw him in another interview on YouTube. I watched a few of them after this, and he said somebody asked him, way he did those interviews, he would get messages from people and then he'd answer questions on his YouTube channel. And they asked him who did that, and he said he still said that several years after I first heard him say that he thinks Kansas City did it for whatever reason. He didn't really give his reasoning, but I can give my reasons. I tell you what, they were madder than hell at Lefty Rosenthal, and they knew that he was an informant. I knew that he was talking. They knew that he's the one that stirred up all the stuff that brought the heat down on him from the gaming commission and from the Metro PD. They knew that, and the FBI, but they were really bad at Lefty Rosenthal. I know that. Hey, Barry, where'd you guys go eat? He always takes people to eat.
We met at the Pepper Mill right after we ate breakfast, so we didn't go eat afterwards.
Oh, okay, all right.
But when we were touring, we hit all the spots. One of those is he shows the exact parking spot that Lefty was parked in when his car blew up.
Yeah. I think.
But at the end of the tour, instead of going eating pizza, we just drove around. He said, "Ask any questions you want,"
Okay.
So we asked a few questions. In fact, I asked him. I said, "Who killed Sam Giancana?"
Yeah.
And he said, "You'll have to buy my next book to find the answer to that." This is in 2016.
Yeah.
So I guess the next book, Danny, is it the one, the Tony Spilotro book? Is that the one after 2016? I haven't bought it yet. I got the two Culotta books, but
yeah, the one that came out was called "The Rise and Fall of a Quote Unquote Casino Mobster."
Yeah, that one I haven't got yet.
That's a good book.
I ordered it on Amazon today.
Did you really?
I did.
You will. Oh, good.
But no, the tour was very interesting, and he was a great tour guide. He told great stories. He's a likable fella. It was. Yeah. I'm shaking his hand, thinking, "Is that his Traeger finger that I'm shaking?"
Yeah, he's very personable, isn't he? Or was?
He was very,
Yeah.
very first. Yeah.
The people that took the tours loved him. I mean, it really was amazing. In fact, I got a call back when I was still living in Vegas part time. I got my marriage minister license. We could perform marriages,
Oh, yeah.
and I only married one couple who ended up divorced within a year. But she moved back to Chicago and she read and heard about Frank, and she got a hold of me, and she was really. Because Frank was there that day I did the ceremony. Frank was in attendance. They wanted a mobster on site, so he came with me, and her and Frank had gotten to be buddies, and she was really shook up, and it was just amazing to me the number of people who really cared about Frank.
Yeah,
And,
I've noticed that online.
Yeah, it was surprising.
Yeah, when we were in Vegas for the thing in 2018, and he was there, the whole time that I saw him, he was always talking to somebody, and it was a different person every 10 minutes. There were people lined up, that wanted to gab with him a bit, and he seemed happy to talk to anybody. He seemed very personable.
Yeah, he was in his element, when he was doing that. He really loved it. And we had planned we were going to have MobCon 2020 this year, the 25th anniversary of Casino on top of it. And we were getting some great speakers lined up, and then COVID hit and everything went down the tubes. But it had a lot of promise, but what the hell can you do? It's just the way it worked out. But yeah, MobCon 2020, we were going to give it a shot, and I think it would have been a good one.
You talk about Frank being personable. One of the stops on his tour was the house that they used in the movie that was supposed to be De Niro and Sharon Stone's house.
Oh, yeah.
So if I remember, it's on a cul-de-sac. And so we stop and we're all out of the car looking at the house and talking, and the owner of the house comes out. And he knows Frank. Frank's been there so many times. He knows Frank. He comes out and he is very proud. He's excited to talk about his house being used on that tour. You'd think he'd get tired of everybody stopping in front of his house, but he walked out and talked to us. And like I said, he knew Frank very well.
Interesting.
Yeah, Frank said he made friends with this guy over time. He said the guy loved it. Like you were saying, you'd think he'd be annoyed, but he couldn't wait for him to stop.
Yeah, he came out of the house and came out and talked to us for a long time.
That house is actually off of Las Vegas National Golf Course. Lefty Rosenthal's actual house is off of Las Vegas Country Club.
Oh.
Yeah, he took us Lefty lived in a gated community.
Correct.
So he took us to there, but we couldn't get in. Obviously, it was gated. Yeah. So we did not see Lefty's house, but we saw Tony's and his brothers, and it was interesting.
Yeah. He got a deal going. Somebody have a question?
Yeah, I did. Sorry, Gary. Hey,
Go ahead.
Danny, I know I'm jumping back, but back to Nancy Spilatro. How long ago was that you saw? Is she still, does anybody know what happened to her? Someone said she's really suffering financially, and
she excuse me, she was when I was dealing with her and Vincent. She was, and I think I tracked her down when this documentary project first materialized, a possible documentary. They wanted the production company wanted me to see if Nancy would cooperate with the series, and so she had moved from where she had been, and I found an address which I think was a good address for her, but I couldn't get a phone number. So I told the production company, I said, look, here's where if you want to send somebody to that address and see if it's her and try to talk with her. And I said, but I got to be honest with you. I said, Nancy's all about money. I said, she's hurting financially. At least was then. I assume it's still the same. And I said, I'm not sure. I said that everything she told me when I interviewed her was accurate and truthful. I said, so just be aware of that. If you make a deal with her, what you might be getting. And as far as I know, they never sent anybody to, to see if that was her and to see if she'd work with them. But as far as I know, that was, still a good address as of a couple of years ago.
And what was the story on Vincent? He's dead, right?
Vincent died a couple of years. Yeah, he died just about when Nancy moved from her previous address to where I think I located her.
Was it a drug overdose, or do we know?
He had quite a few issues to deal with drug and alcohol abuse. So he had, some liver issues, cirrhosis, I understand. And I guess it was chronic. And he used to go to somewhere in some hospital in Southern California every so often. He'd leave Vegas and go for treatments. So he was having some problems there. And Frank told me the story on Vincent. What Tony had done, they couldn't have children, him and Nancy, so he paid 10 grand, I think it was, a piece to two people to have a child, and they had Vincent, and he took over Vincent and made it an adoption. But he paid surrogate parents to have Vincent.
With Tony, was it inseminated with Tony's?
No.
Okay.
Frank talks about it in his last book, well, his second to last book, and he says that they paid them $10,000, and he mentions who it was too, and I can't remember her name, but he clears it up in his last book.
So it wasn't with Tony's DNA.
No, it was someone totally unrelated to Tony and his wife.
The guy, I think, used to do some radio work and stuff for the mob guys, and he was apparently a genius. And I guess that was appealing to Tony, to have somebody with some brains, that was going to participate in this deal. And then later, I believe the mother, the girl half of the deal was maybe thinking about trying to get some money out of Tony or something, or tried to contact him. And Frank set her straight. He said, "If I were you, I'd leave this alone. It might not be a good move."
You mentioned the tie, the $50 tie. Whatever happened to all of Tony's possessions? Did Nancy try to sell all that stuff?
Nancy and Vincent. Vincent was kind of the mover and shaker financially, whatever financiers there were. But, Vincent was always selling stuff. He was selling when the mob experience there, where was it, the Trop, when that was before they folded up. He was selling them stuff, family pictures and home videos and all that kind of stuff. So they needed apparently quite a bit more money than they were taking in, from, I don't know, whatever, Social Security or disability, whatever they were getting. And Vincent was always looking for a buck and ways to make a buck. Didn't make him a bad guy, but it's just that's the situation they were in. And Nancy, I think, allowed him to be the guy that to kind of run the operation, and she just, I think, went along with the program.
That's interesting. The guy can make all kinds of money and then blow all kinds of money too, and not ever save any. Live for the moment. I don't know. You would thought he could. He would have had a bunch of money hidden away. A lot of those guys will have some kind of a box hidden out with cash money in it. You buy a mobster's old house, be sure and you go through all the walls and dig up the backyard a little bit.
I remember Frank. I think it was the first Culotta, but the bio. And in fact, I think it's in the book. Actually, Frank said that he had 38 guys, associates of his, criminal associates, and all 38 of them were dead, either at the hands of other mobsters or at the hands of law enforcement. He said, and that didn't count all the ones in prison. So he said, job security, that wasn't that great. He said he didn't want to be number 39 to go on that list.
And when they get old, they haven't paid into Social Security more than likely, or awful lot of them haven't paid anything into Social Security. Always lift off that cash money. All right. Well, it is about 9 o'clock here. Anybody got any more questions for Denny, or for me, or for?
I haven't got a question, but I got a comment. I just came across a podcast called Mobbed Up.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's old and I just found it, or if it's new. I heard you on there, Gary.
Yeah.
But if nobody else has listened to it, it's great. It's very interesting.
That's a kid works for the Las Vegas Review Journal, Reed Redmond, and he did this in connection with the Bob Museum, and he did a 10-part episode or 10-episode series on this whole time in Las Vegas.
I was gonna say, I recently came across a video. Someone took Frank's tour and videoed. It's about an hour and a half.
Yeah,
So you can go back and see. Yeah, on YouTube.
Yeah. I heard about that. I haven't watched it, but I heard about it.
I hadn't heard about that one. I have to look for that. Put a link up on my Facebook page. You guys be sure, and I've started this new Facebook page. It's a small one, just people that listen to podcasts, and I think there's only 133 people on it, and I want to keep it small. My other one's got like 9,000 people on it, I just noticed the other day. But this is a smaller one where we can have a little more interaction and with each other, and have some more open discussion without having any booger-eating morons jump on there. And
Less rat comments.
and all that.
Jeez.
I tell you what, the worst comments are on YouTube, though. I swear to God, there's some nutcases on YouTube. I look at those comments like, oh my God.
People are brutal.
They are.
Hey, Gary, thanks for doing this, man. And Denny, geez, thanks a lot. I mean, it's
Denny.
fascinating to hear Denny talk
Yeah.
about.
Oh, it's been fun. I'm real tickled to get a chance to talk to you guys.
All right.
And don't forget, Frank Cullotta's Greatest Kitchen Hits and The Informant. And just so you know about The Informant, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, that this guy was a tipster, hung out at the upper crust, and they would give the hole-in-the-wall gang information on drug dealers to knock over. They would know who had a lot of drugs, and then Davino and Frank and the boys would do the burglaries. And then they would give these guys their cut for the tip money. And on one occasion, they had a hell of a good score. And one of the other guys said, well, why do we have to tell them how much we got? Why don't we withhold a little bit, pay them their tip based on the lower amount?
Yeah.
So they did, and these guys knew it. The tipsters knew it, that they got screwed. So they decided that they knew where the drugs were stashed. So one of the guys goes over and burglarizes Frank's house. It seals the drugs. Seals the drugs back. And then he comes to the conclusion. He says, they're going to know, because his cohort told him, don't take anything but the drugs. There's going to be other merchandise and stuff in there and jewelry, but don't take any of that stuff. Just take the drugs. So this guy says that did the burglary, says they're going to know damn well it was an inside job. I mean, why would anybody leave all the other loot and just, walk out with this bag of drugs? So he comes to the conclusion that Frank will kill him when Frank figures out who it had to be. And he said, it's going to be me or Frank. We both can't survive this. One of us has got to go.
Wow.
So him and his buddy decide maybe they'll knock Frank and Tony off. And they're putting together a plan in the upper crust to kill Frank and Tony.
Wow.
And then the guy determines, he said, when it push came to shove, he said, I'm not a killer. I can't do it. I know it would be the way out, but I can't do it. So he said the only other way is to take Frank down let the law take him down. So he contacts Metro Secret Witness and says, I got a deal for you. And that's how this guy ended up becoming an informant, first for Metro, and then they turned him over to the FBI and the federal prosecutors. So he went through that. So anyway, Frank calls me one day last August, just a year ago, and he says, guess who was on my tour last night? I says, who? So he gives me this name. And I said, well, who the hell's he? I never heard this guy before. He said, he's the guy that was the informant that brought us down. I said, what? I said, I thought I knew everything there was to know about that era. I said, how did this get by me? Frank said, well, it's not the kind of thing I talk about all the time. So I said, well, I would have wished the hell I'd have been in that car. That must have been quite here's this guy that that was the informant against you. I said, and he made it back. Okay, huh? He said, oh, yeah. He said, we talked. He said, in fact, I want to tell you he wants to write a book. You want to work with him on it. So Frank set me up with this guy to do the informant book. So
that sounds like
When's that book coming out?
well, it's at the publishers now. It'll be out by the end of the year. So that'll be 2 to look for: the kitchen hits, greatest kitchen hits, and the informant. I'll make sure Gary knows when they're out. So
Yeah,
All right.
when he wants to see
we'll
him.
get something out on the podcast and on the Facebook pages. So thanks a lot, Denny. I really appreciate you. You're a true gentleman. I'll tell you what, guys. When I first started doing this, Denny, he just took me under his wing and he lined me up with all those witnesses, all those storytellers to videotape out in Las Vegas for my first movie, and he's always been there for me if I had any questions or wanted to know about anything or needed anything. Denny was always there for me. He's a good guy. I appreciate you, Denny.
Well, thank you, Gary, and good relationship we've had, and you're always there for me too. So it's a two-way street, and I appreciate the hell out of that.
Very entertaining,
Thanks a lot.
Denny. Enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was great.
All right.
Well, thank you, guys. It's been a real pleasure talking with you. Anytime anybody's got a question, just get a hold of me, and I'll answer it for you if I can. And if not, I'll make something up that sounds only kidding.
You know, Denny, you never let the facts get in the way of a good story. That's my motto, man.
Okay, fellas. Good night. It's been a real pleasure.
All right.
Thank you very
Gary,
much.
thanks a lot
everybody.
for doing this. Very
Good night now.
All right, good night, everybody.
Take care.
All right, Casey, be careful with those lighters, Casey.
Happy birthday, Larry.
Thank you, Casey.
By the way.
Birthday. Birthday. I want to do this again. You got any suggestions for topics? Why email me and maybe I can get another guest on and we can do something like this.
That's
again.
great, Gary.
Okay.
We could do one on mob books or something, maybe.
Yeah.
Like we did movies. Books would be a good one or something like that.
Okay. All right. We'll do it.
But
Fantastic, Gary.
yeah, a lot of
Okay.
fun.
All right. Good night.
Thanks,
everybody.
Gary.
Night.
Take
Good
care,
night,
All right,
everybody.
Gary. Take care.
Thank you.